So let's now start adding a form, a standard HTML form in this review HTML file. And then thereafter, we're going to make sure that this template also gets rendered by our view, which it currently isn't, and that we then also try to handle the form submission. But first of all, let's start with the form. For this, we create this form tag. We use the form tag, the default HTML form element. And then in such a form, we can output all the inputs we want to have in that form. So to start simple, we could add an input of type text, let's say, the default HTML input element. And that would allow users to enter some text. Now we can give this input a label to give the user a hint about the data the user should enter here. And there we could expect the user name. So we say your name. And it's also then considered a good practice for accessibility to connect label and input with special attributes in HTML and give the label a for attribute where you point at the ID of another element to which this label is related. So here we could point at an element with ID name and then give this input the ID name so that for screen readers, for example, it's clear that this label refers to this input element. We also want to give this input a name attribute. So here I picked name as an ID name. I could have picked anything. Maybe let's go with username to make that less confusing. So username it is here. But then the name attribute is a special attribute we can add to form elements like this input element. And this will then allow us to identify the submitted values once the form was submitted. And here I'll also use username as a value here, but we could use a different value than we did here. It doesn't have to be the same one. Now we have a form with one input element. We now also should add a button which can be pressed to submit the form. And here I'll then give this a caption of send. Now this is all just HTML, and if this is totally unclear, you definitely should revise those HTML basics. We're just creating an HTML form here. Now, before we do anything else here, before we add any other configuration, let's make sure that this template also gets served. So in the views.py file, here in the review function, I'll return render, and I accept my request here and pass that to render, and then point at the template which I want to render, which is reviews/review.html. So this template which we just worked on. And then save this file. And now with that, we're almost ready to start our server. First, I just want to go to my settings.py file, and in there I want to add my app, my reviews app, so that Django will find the template here. That is important, otherwise this app template will not be discovered by Django. And this crashes because this should be path here, not include. So path in the URLs.py file in the main feedback folder. Path, and then only use include here. Oversight from my side, with that fixed, now I can start that development server. And if we now visit localhost 8000, we get this very basic form here. Now it's lacking all styling, but it is a form. It also has this send button. And now watch the URL and see what happens if I click it. You see that? If I click send, the URL changes, and we got question mark username equals nothing. Now if I enter max here and I click send, the URL changes to question mark username equals max. So it looks like the data I entered here is then added to the URL. So let's now explore whether that is what we want, and let's talk about form submission and different HTTP methods.